Watch until the end of the video to get the valuable lesson. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to update the latest and best stories. Once upon a time, in a kingdom deep in a valley, surrounded by mysterious mountains and forests, there lived a king named Mahadeva, a just king, a peace-loving king, and a king respected by all. But despite his golden palace and his treasures, he still had a concern in his heart that no one knew about. For many years, the king could not sleep peacefully. Every night, after the lavish banquets ended, while his courtiers were fast asleep, the king would sit alone by the window of his room, watching the starry sky and listening to the wind whistling from the distant mountains. Many physicians, priests, and even magicians came from far away, but none of them could help him find true sleep. A ruler of a kingdom who cannot sleep is like a man who keeps a treasure he cannot touch. That was what his old advisor had once said to him, and the only one who dared to say it directly. But unfortunately, he passed away last winter, taking with him his irreplaceable sincerity. One night, while walking in the palace garden, the king overheard two guards whispering, "Have you seen the water carrier at the Easter market? What kind of person is that? Every time I talk to him, my heart feels light as if I have never had any worries. I heard the villagers say that if you just hear him laugh once, sleep will come as easily as the spring breeze." The king stood still. A water carrier can bring sleep? Is it true or just a fabrication? But from that day on, he could not get that story out of his mind. One night, while walking in the palace garden, the king heard two soldiers whispering, "Have you seen the water carrier in the Easter market? What kind of person is he? Every time I talk to him, my heart feels as light as if I had never had any worries." I heard the villagers say that if you hear him laugh once, sleep will come as easily as the spring breeze. The king stood still. Could the water carrier bring sleep? Was it true or just a lie? But from that day on, he could not forget that story. The next morning, King Mahadeva sent his most trusted minister, Prime Minister Rudran, to the eastern village to invite the water carrier to the palace. Although Rudran did not understand why the king was so interested in a commoner, the order was still the order. When he arrived at the village market, he immediately recognized the person everyone was talking about. A man in plain clothes, with a tanned face, but eyes as bright as the dawn on the mountaintop. His name was Sundar, a simple name, but it meant one of pure beauty. Sundar carried two large, heavy bamboo water buckets and walked lightly, singing as he walked, his voice like a stream in the forest. Whoever he met, whether children or old people, he bowed, asked about them, stopped to help if he saw someone in trouble. The villagers loved him like a family member. When the vizier Rudran approached and said, "The king has summoned you to the palace," Sundar was not surprised, not confused, just nodded and smiled. If the king needs help, the common people are willing to help. The fateful meeting begins. Sundar entered the palace, not bowing, not trembling, but still full of respect. In contrast to the officials in red velvet robes, he only wore a faded rough cloth suit, his shoulders still marked by the marks of carrying water for many years. But what made the whole court silent was the serene smile on his lips, as if he were standing in the middle of nature, not a place where a glance could make someone lose their head. The king looked at the man in front of him, not saying anything for a long time. "Are you really the one who can help others sleep well?" Sundar simply replied, "Your Majesty, I cannot cure sleep, but I can tell you stories. Who knows, the story might bring relief to your heart." And so, the first storytelling session began in the palace, amidst the flickering candlelight and the curious eyes of the courtiers. Sundar told the story of a cowherd boy who got lost in the forest, and how he found his way home by making friends with the sound of birds. Then he told the story of a blind old woman who taught poor children by singing through her ears. His voice was as light as a breeze, but each word seemed to paint a picture in the listener's mind. And that night, King Mahadeva slept soundly until morning, for the first time in nearly 3 years. From then on, Sundar was kept in the palace, no longer carrying water for the villagers, but carrying joy for the entire royal court. But life in the palace was never peaceful for long. Some eyes began to follow Sundar with suspicion, and not everyone was pleased with the laughter he brought. From the day Sundar entered the palace, the atmosphere in the palace seemed to be lit up. The laughter that spread from his stories not only touched the king's heart, but also made many officials, who were used to being serious and dogmatic, laugh. Sometimes, even the coldest palace maid smiled faintly when passing by the corridor where Sundar often told stories. But where there is light, there is also darkness. Among the ministers, there was one who was not happy with Sundar's presence. Prime Minister Rudran, who used to be King Mahadeva's right-hand man. He was the one who brought Sundar to the palace, but he was also the first to find himself replaced. A water carrier now becomes the only one who can make the king laugh. All my years of loyalty, are they worth a few trivial stories? Every night, while the king slept peacefully in his fairy tale dreams, Prime Minister Rudran could not sleep. Not because of a dream, but because of the fire of jealousy burning in his heart. A plan was drawn up in silence. One new moonlit night, when the palace lights were off, Rudran quietly approached Sundar in the garden behind the main hall. He was wearing a red silk scarf and a fake smile. "Sundar, brother, there is something I must tell you, because I am concerned about your honor." Sundar kept smiling slightly, but his eyes followed the vizier's every move. "What is it, my lord?" The vizier looked around, then whispered as if afraid that the heavens and earth would hear. "I heard the king say, lately he has been feeling uncomfortable because of your breath. He did not want to hurt you, so he told me to speak privately. I advise you, from now on, when you come near the king, wear this scarf over your mouth. That way you will not offend the king." Sundar stood still, not out of shame, but out of sadness. He never thought that his sincerity would cause discomfort to others. But then he nodded, taking the handkerchief. "If that makes your majesty feel more comfortable, then I am willing." A man wearing a scarf, the whole court gossiped. The next day, Sundar appeared with a red silk scarf lightly wrapped around his mouth. He still told stories, still brought laughter to everyone, but that smile was now hidden. Some people found it strange, but no one dared to ask directly. Only the king, after a few days, began to wonder, "Sundar, why do you always cover your mouth when you see me?" But the king did not ask directly. Instead, he asked the Prime Minister Rudran himself, and Rudran, in a calm voice, answered without hesitation, "Your Majesty, I asked Sundar. He said he felt that your Majesty's breath was too strong, making him uncomfortable. Out of respect, he covered his mouth, so he wouldn't have to inhale that smell." The room was dead silent. The king was stunned. "The person I trust despises me so much?" The pain of being offended lies not in the words, but in the trust betrayed. A storyteller may lie, but a person who keeps you asleep for years and hides his disgust behind a smile is like a knife hidden in silk. The king did not get angry, nor did he scream. He simply stood up and turned to his trusted guard. "Tomorrow, when the person carrying the red rose leaves the main gate, execute him. No need to ask why." A cold command, but as gentle as a breeze. Rudran, standing next to him, bowed his head slightly. His heart was pounding like a war drum. Finally, the game had come to an end. The next morning, after a touching story about the blind shoemaker who could still make the most beautiful shoes in the kingdom, King Mahadeva gave Sundar a bouquet of bright red roses. It was his way of thanking the person who had once made him sleep peacefully. "You have done what no one else has done for so many years. I give you this as a farewell." Sundar bowed his head, touched. Little did he know that it was the bouquet of fate. But on his way out of the main hall, the Prime Minister Rudran suddenly blocked his way. "That bouquet, give it to me. You are not worthy of the king's gift. The credit should go to me, the one who has been loyal all his life." Without waiting for Sundar to react, Rudran snatched the bouquet and strode out the main gate, head held high, cloak fluttering like a victor. Then, a loud noise was heard outside the gate. A white bird flew up into the sky. Everyone was in a panic, and Sundar stood there like a stone. A few minutes later, the soldiers returned to report. Prime Minister Rudran had been executed by order of the king. When Sundar returned to the palace to report, the king was shocked to see him, alive, still calm. "You are still alive?" Sundar nodded. His voice was still gentle. "Your Majesty, I don't understand what happened. I only know that the bouquet of flowers you gave me was taken away by the Prime Minister." The king was silent, then burst out laughing, the first incomplete laugh in months. "Ah, so, he really deserved that bouquet more than you." But this time, there was no joy in that laugh, but only the relief of someone who had just escaped a traitor. "Sundar, you have always spoken the truth, lived the truth. From this day forward, you will no longer be a storyteller in the palace." Sundar looked up, slightly confused. But the king continued, "You will be the chronicler of this dynasty, for those who know the hearts of men will know how to write the truth forever." After becoming the court scribe, Sundar no longer told stories, just to the king. He began traveling the kingdom, recording the lives of the people, small but true stories, and bringing them back to the palace. Each week, he presented them to the court. "Your Majesty, this is a story about an ordinary person, but their actions deserve to be remembered." The first story Sundar told in his new role, not about a traitor or a talented prince, was about a young gatekeeper in a village on the edge of the forest. In a small village called Bhaktapur, there was a boy named Ramu who worked as a buffalo herder for a wealthy landowner. Every day, he took the buffaloes to the stream, watching the herd while humming a song. One day, he saw a stranger sneaking into an ancient temple near the forest. The boy followed them and discovered the thieves were digging ancient gems out of a 1,000-year-old altar. Ramu was not strong enough to stop them, but instead of running away, he tricked the thieves by playing his flute loudly and calling the buffaloes to run around. Thinking that the villagers had discovered him, the thieves panicked and ran away, leaving the precious gems behind. The boy then went to report to the village chief. The gems were returned to the temple, and the whole village called him the guardian of the ancestors' souls. Sundar recounted the story, his eyes shining. No sword, no position. An orphan boy, with a flute and a herd of buffaloes, preserved a part of history for his village. The king listened, thoughtful. He said, "Sundar, I used to think that truth only existed in palaces. Now I see it lives in the smallest of people." Next, Sundar told a story from the south, from the land near the border. There was an old soldier named Kaleem, who was assigned to guard the railway boundary. One night of heavy rain and storm, he discovered a section of the track that had eroded and shifted. The train would pass through there the next morning, and would surely meet with a catastrophic accident. Kaleem had no means of communication, nor any means of alarm. In the rain and wind, he ran more than 5 kilometers to the front of the line, using his coat as a warning signal for the train to stop. The train driver saw it in time and stopped abruptly, saving the lives of more than 300 passengers. After the incident, Kaleem did not ask for a reward. When asked why he did it, he simply said, "Because I have lost a loved one in such an accident. I do not want anyone to suffer that pain." The stories Sundar brought back gradually changed the way the court viewed them. The newly appointed prime minister once asked, "Why tell the stories of the people? They have no influence on the country." And the king replied, "Because the country is not built with palaces. It is built with people like them." From then on, the court issued an edict. Every spring, Sundar would hold a story fair, where anyone could share a true story from their life. Inspiring stories would be engraved on stone tablets placed in the central square. Honest, kind, brave people, even commoners, would be publicly rewarded. People everywhere called these festivals the Days of Truth. And Sundar became a symbol of one thing: he who keeps not the sword, but the memory. Sundar began to receive letters from all over, stories from farmers, blacksmiths, single mothers, healers, blind teachers. In one letter, someone wrote, "I used to think that only the rich were worth remembering, but listening to Sundar's stories, I feel that I have value too." One day, during a storytelling session in the square, a 12-year-old girl took the microphone and said, "I don't have a big story, but I once returned a bag of money that a stranger dropped. I was afraid that people would blame me for being greedy, so I chose to tell the truth. My teacher said, 'That is honesty.'" The whole square fell silent. Then one person clapped, 2 people, then 1,000. Sundar looked at the crowd, then looked up at the sky. He thought to himself, the fairy tale of the past is no longer just in books. It is resurrected every day in people's hearts. 5 years have passed since Sundar became the royal recorder. From a simple water carrier, he has become a beacon of light for the people. People come not only to listen to his stories, but also to see themselves in them. Someone asked, Sundar, what are you that you are so powerful? And he just smiled. I have no magic. I just do not keep silent when the truth needs to be told. However, the truth always has enemies. A group of old officials, who had lost power when the court changed to the people's direction, began to secretly collude with the neighboring country, plotting to overthrow the king. They whispered to each other, that storyteller is the root of change. To cut the tree, you have to pull out the roots. They made up stories, distorting that Sundar used stories to influence politics, that he encouraged the people to rebel with words. One morning, soldiers surrounded the palace library where Sundar was working. He was urgently summoned on charges of inciting rebellion by words. The whole kingdom was shaken. People from all over flocked to the capital, not to cause a riot, but to hear the defense of a storyteller. In the great hall, reserved for trials of high treason, Sundar stepped out, still wearing his coarse robes, holding a worn-back book in his hand. The minister spoke. You are accused of using words to stir up trouble. How do you justify it? Sundar did not bow his head. He shouted, if telling of kindness is a sin, then I will commit it every day. If telling of honesty makes you tremble, then you should be the ones on trial, for you have deceived the people. His voice was like thunder. The people clapped their hands, shouting, Sundar is innocent. Telling stories is not rebellion. At that moment, the king entered, without arrogance, without authority, with just a simple robe. He walked to the center of the hall, raised his hand, and said, he who finds the truth dangerous is the one who lives by lies. Sundar will not be judged. On the contrary, we will let your story be the light of this kingdom forever. From that day on, Storytelling Day became a national holiday, and Sundar was named the first keeper of the flame of truth of the dynasty, not because of his title, but because an entire nation looked to him as a beacon in a sea of lies. A few years later, when Sundar's hair was already streaked with gray, he wrote a final letter, which he hung in the central library with the title, A Letter to Those Who Do Not Want to Live a Lie. The letter read, not everyone who tells the truth is a hero, but every hero begins by refusing to accept lies. If you are poor, keep your dignity. If you are strong, protect the weak. And if you have a voice, do not let it become silent through fear. Dear viewers, Sundar's story is not a royal dream. It is a symbol of truth living in a world full of lies. When you stand up for what is right, you are not alone. When you tell the truth, you continue a flame that began 1,000 years ago. And when you dare to be true to yourself, you inspire thousands of others. Whoever you are, wherever you are, be the first authentic storyteller in your world.